February the 11th, 1988. A small, unremarkable house in Aberdeen, Scotland. An elderly woman dies alone. No flowers sent from the palace. No statement from Buckingham Palace. No acknowledgement from the family she had devoted 16 years of her life to. Her name was Marion Crawford, and in her will she left one single instruction: that a box of private letters and mementos be returned to the royal family. Inside that box were letters written in the Queen Mother's own hand. Letters that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Marion Crawford had been telling the truth all along. And the woman who had spent 38 years destroying her reputation, the beloved, adored, national treasure Queen Mother, was the very same woman who had given her permission to write in the first place. This is not gossip. This is documented. And today, we are going to go through it, piece by piece, because this story deserves to be told properly.
If this is your first time here, welcome to Jenny Exposes. Please do take a moment right now to hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. It genuinely helps more people find this kind of forensic royal history, and we have a great deal more where this came from. Now, let's get into it. Marion Crawford was not a celebrity. She was not an aristocrat. She was not someone who had been born into proximity to power. She was the daughter of a mechanical engineer's clerk, born in Ayrshire in 1909. She trained at Edinburgh's Moray House Institute as a specialist in child development and education. Serious work. Quiet, methodical, dedicated work. In 1932, at the age of 22, she was hired by the Duke and Duchess of York as governess to their two daughters. The elder daughter was 5 years old. Her name was Princess Elizabeth. The youngest was 2. Her name was Princess Margaret. Marion Crawford would become, for the next 16 years, the most important non-family figure in both of their lives. She would know them better than almost anyone. She would teach them, guide them, argue for their education to be expanded beyond the narrow confines the palace preferred. And she would love them. That part matters. Because what was done to her later was not done to a stranger. It was done to someone they knew. Someone they had called by a nickname every single day of their childhood. Now here is the part of this story that almost never gets properly emphasized, and I want you to sit with it for a moment, because it reframes everything that follows. Marion Crawford had a life of her own. She had a fiancé. His name was George Butheley. He was a banker. They were engaged. And the royal family asked her, repeatedly, to delay her marriage. Not once, not twice, repeatedly, over the course of years. The reasoning was always the same. It would cause disruption to the princesses. It would unsettle their routine. The girls needed stability. And Crawfie, as she was known, agreed. Each time, she agreed. She postponed her own marriage, her own family, her own future, for over 16 years. She finally married George Butheley in September 1947. To put that in context, Princess Elizabeth herself married Prince Philip just 2 months later, in November 1947. The woman who had given up her own life so that Elizabeth could have a stable childhood watched that same princess get married, as a married woman herself, for barely 8 weeks. And in that same year, 1947, Crawfie was appointed a Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, a personal honour from King George VI for distinguished royal service. They honoured her. They recognised what she had sacrificed. And then, 3 years later, they erased her. So let us talk about how it actually happened. Because the version that has been told, the version that the palace allowed to circulate, is that Crawfie went rogue. That she was a servant who broke confidence for personal gain. That she sold her employer's secrets to the American press. That version is a lie by omission. And the letters in that box prove it. In 1949, the editors of Ladies' Home Journal in America, Bruce and Beatrice Gould, approached the Foreign Office with a proposal. They wanted warm, human interest stories about the British royal family for American audiences. This was not a tabloid fishing expedition.
This was a diplomatic consideration. The post-war relationship between Britain and America was complex, and the British government actively welcomed the idea of positive royal coverage in the American press. The Foreign Office suggested Marion Crawford as a potential source, at which point Crawfie did something that her detractors never mention when they tell this story. She went directly to Queen Elizabeth, who would later become the Queen Mother, and she asked permission. She did not go behind anyone's back. She did not sneak around. She asked, in writing, whether she could help provide material for American publication. And the Queen wrote back, personally. The letter survives. It was in that box that was returned to the palace in 1988. And here is what the letter said. Here is the documented, sourced, on-the-record content of that letter. The Queen wrote that she felt most definitely that Crawfie should not write and sign articles about the children, as people in positions of confidence must be, in her words, utterly oyster. That phrase, utterly oyster, means closed, silent, giving nothing away. That part of the letter is the part that the palace wanted people to know about. But the letter did not end there. The same letter went on to give Crawfie qualified permission to provide anonymous assistance to a journalist named Dermot Morra, who would then write up the material under his own name. The Queen herself suggested this arrangement. The condition was clear. Don't put your name on it. Help from behind the scenes. The door was not closed. It was left open, with a specific instruction about how to walk through it.
What happened next is where the story becomes genuinely complicated, and where Crawfie's husband, George Boothleigh, enters the picture in a way that multiple biographers have noted. The American publishers understood that the commercial value of this story lay specifically in Crawfie's name. Not a journalist she'd briefed, her name, her first-person account. They drew up a contract with a clause that has since been examined and documented. A clause that permitted publication without the Queen's consent, possibly with only the consent of Princess Elizabeth, or indeed no consent at all, and explicitly under Crawfie's own name. It was, in the plainest terms, a contract designed to override the Queen's stated condition. And George Boothleigh pushed his wife to sign it. Multiple sources close to Crawfie in later life, as well as biographers including Hugo Vickers in his work on the Queen Mother, have noted that Boothleigh was the driving force behind the decision to proceed with named publication. Crawfie was not an aggressive commercial operator. She was a woman who had spent 16 years obeying. It was her husband who saw the money and pushed her through the door. The articles ran in 1950. Then came the book, The Little Princesses. And now we get to what I would argue is the most important detail in this entire story. Because it is the detail that makes the punishment completely indefensible. What did Marion Crawford actually write? What were the terrible revelations? What were the damaging secrets that apparently justified 38 years of total social destruction? Let me tell you what was in that book. Elizabeth and Margaret both bit their nails. Margaret had a habit of biting her sister. The Queen's bedroom as a child was pink and fawn with flowered chintz. Margaret's was salmon pink and cluttered. Life inside Buckingham Palace, Crawfie wrote, rather resembled camping in a museum. The king was shy with his daughters. The Queen had worried about whether Philip was a suitable husband for Elizabeth. One literary reviewer at the time described the book as, and I want to quote this directly, a confection so sugary that it seems incredible anyone could be offended. Another called it the most affectionate portrait of a family ever written by someone who had actually lived inside it. This was not a betrayal. This was not a scandal. This was a woman who loved the family she had served, writing warmly about them for an international audience. And they destroyed her for it. The Queen Mother told people in her circle that Crawfie had gone off her head. Her private secretary was instructed to send back the manuscript with annotations indicating passages to be removed. But by that point, the contract had already been signed, and the American publishers, the Goulds, had already decided they were not going to allow any last-minute royal interference. Communications from Crawfie about the palace's objections were reportedly suppressed by the publishers before they could delay publication. The window had closed.
the book came out. And within a remarkably short period of time, the consequences were total. Crawfie was evicted from Nottingham Cottage at Kensington Palace, the grace and favour home she had been given in her retirement as recognition of her years of service. She was barred from royal events. She was removed from the Christmas card list. She was struck from the social world that had formed the entire fabric of her adult life. And Princess Elizabeth, by then Queen Elizabeth II, never spoke to her again. Not once. In 38 years. Neither did Princess Margaret. The girls who had called her Crawfie every day of their childhood, who had run to her in the mornings, who had relied on her for everything. They cut her off as completely and as finally as if she had never existed. Now a phrase entered the vocabulary of the royal household. To do a Crawfie. That was the expression. To do a Crawfie meant to be a servant who broke confidence for personal gain. It became, within palace walls, the single worst thing that could be said about a member of staff. It was wielded as a warning and a weapon simultaneously. Do not do a Crawfie. And the name, her name, this woman's actual name, became a pejorative, a synonym for treachery. In a household where she had given 16 years of her life, where she had postponed her marriage to serve them, where she had been honoured by the king himself 3 years earlier, her name was now used to frighten other servants into silence. Then came 1955, and the episode that finished whatever remained of her public reputation. Crawfie had been writing a syndicated column, ghost-written, it must be said, by someone else, and published under her name. In the summer of 1955, the column was written weeks in advance of publication, as columns often were. It described, in warm and detailed terms, the trooping the colour ceremony and royal ascot, the colour of the Queen's dress, the atmosphere of the crowds, the joy of the occasion. There was one catastrophic problem. A national rail strike had cancelled both events. Neither of them had taken place, and the column describing them in vivid detail had already gone to press. When the papers ran, it was immediately obvious to anyone paying attention that Crawfie's column was describing events she could not possibly have attended, because they had not happened. The story was gleefully picked up. She was mocked as a fraud, a fabricator, a woman so desperate to maintain the illusion of royal access that she was inventing ceremonies that had never occurred. The fact that the column had been ghostwritten, that she had not been the one who wrote those descriptions, that the entire mechanism of ghostwritten advance filing made this the kind of mistake any columnist could make. None of that mattered. The damage was done. She retreated to Aberdeen. She largely disappeared from public life. And she disappeared for the remaining 33 years of her life. What happened to Crawfie in those years is not well documented, and perhaps that is fitting, given how thoroughly she was erased from the official record. What we do know, and this has been reported, including in the 2018 Time magazine retrospective on her case, is that at some point in the 1970s, Marion Crawford attempted to take her own life. She survived. Her husband, George Buthley, the man who had pushed her to sign the contract that ended her world, died in 1977. She lived alone for 11 more years after that. Alone in Aberdeen, the girls she had raised were the most famous women in the world. One was the Queen of England. The other was Princess Margaret, one of the most photographed women of her era. And the woman who had taught them both, who had advocated for their education, who had given up her own marriage to keep their lives stable. That woman was living alone in a house in Aberdeen, forgotten, publicly disgraced, her name a byword for disloyalty in the very institution she had served. When she died in February 1988, she left that single instruction in her will. The box of letters and mementos. Return them to Buckingham Palace. Think about what that instruction reveals about who she was. She did not sell the letters. She could have. Letters from the Queen Mother, proving that the Queen Mother had given her permission to write. Can you imagine what those would have fetched from a newspaper in 1988? She did not destroy them in bitterness. She did not leave them to be published after her death as a final act of self-vindication. She sent them back. After everything, the eviction, the silence, the 38 years of being erased from a family she had loved, she returned their property to them. Because she had been raised to believe that was the right thing to do. Because she was, at her core, the kind of person who kept her word even when no one else had kept theirs. The royal family received the box in silence. There was no public statement. There was no acknowledgement. No rehabilitation, no apology, not even a quiet private one that we know of. The Queen Mother was still alive. The Queen was still on the throne. Princess Margaret was still alive. Every person who had participated in Crawfie's destruction was either still living or had died without ever addressing what had been done. The letters proved what Crawfie had always maintained, that she had asked permission, that she had been given a qualified yes, that she had not acted as a rogue agent stealing state secrets for American cash. The letters proved it, and the palace took them, put them away, and said nothing. The Little Princesses remains in print to this day. It has been reprinted multiple times, most recently with an introduction by BBC royal correspondent Jenny Bond, who has written thoughtfully about what the book actually is, which is a gentle, warm, deeply affectionate portrait of two little girls growing up in extraordinary circumstances. People read it now, and they are not scandalized. They are charmed, because there is nothing in it to be scandalized by. There never was. The punishment was never proportionate to the offence. The institution had made a decision that no servant, no matter how loyal, no matter how long-serving, no matter how much they have sacrificed, could be permitted to write about the family in their own name, with their own authority, without the palace controlling every word. That was the principle being enforced. Crawfie was not punished because she wrote something damaging. She was punished because she wrote something at all, and because the palace needed to make absolutely certain that no one who came after her would ever consider doing the same thing. And it worked. For decades, it worked spectacularly well. The phrase "doing a Crawfie" kept a great many people silent who might otherwise have spoken. The visible, total destruction of someone who had given everything to that family sent a message that every household employee understood perfectly. You are not a person here. You are a function. And when your function is complete, you will be discarded. And if you attempt to tell your story, we will make you into a warning. What I find most haunting about this case, and I have looked at a great deal of royal history, and I use that word carefully, is the specific quality of the silence. Not anger, not public denunciation, just silence. The Queen never addressed it. The Queen Mother never addressed it. They simply proceeded as if Marion Crawford had never existed. And in the world they inhabited, in the social world that mattered, she effectively hadn't. She had been deleted. With almost no effort, with the simple withdrawal of acknowledgement, they had made a person disappear. No trial, no confrontation, no opportunity for her to defend herself in any forum they recognized. Just the door, closing quietly, and then 38 years of nothing. She gave them 16 years of her life. She gave up her own marriage, her own timeline, her own future, to keep their lives stable. She was honored by their king. She loved their daughters. She wrote about them with a warmth that contemporary readers find almost embarrassingly affectionate. She asked permission before she wrote a single word. And when the moment came that she crossed the line they had drawn, not the line of decency, not the line of loyalty, but the line of institutional control, they gave her 38 years of silence. And the only thing she ever asked, in the end, was that they take their letters back. There is no happy ending to this story. There is no rehabilitation, no royal apology, no moment of public acknowledgement. Marion Crawford died, forgotten, in Aberdeen, and the institution she served went on, as institutions do, without missing a beat. But the documents exist. The letters exist. The book exists and is still being read.